Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. My name is Erin Aoyama. I'm a doctoral candidate in American Studies at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I am the Community Outreach and Research Fellow at Minidoka National Historic Site. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's live program, Extraordinary Service by Ordinary Citizens, part of the Beyond Pearl Harbor virtual events taking place this week. Over the course of the next hour, we'll hear from 3 fantastic speakers, and we will have time for a Q&A at the end. So please leave any questions or comments you may have for our panelists in the chat. We will get to as many as we can. Before I turn things over to our first speaker, I want to take a moment to invite all of us into thinking about what it means to recognize and honor exceptionally selfless and brave service. The Congressional Medal of Honor, the U.S. government's highest award for valor, was first established and awarded during the Civil War, though it would take generations for the meaning and recognition that we associate today with the Medal of Honor to be fully realized. And as our speakers will talk about today, the Medal of Honor and other significant military recognitions can take time and dedicated advocacy to be awarded. As one example, the story of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker comes to mind. I'll put a link in the chat to the NPS page about Dr. Walker if you're interested to read more. But in short, Dr. Walker remains the only woman to earn a Medal of Honor, which she was awarded by President Johnson in 1865. And she earned this recognition not in battle, but in service, a service she had to fight to perform in the first place as a medical doctor and a woman in the 19th century. During the Civil War, Dr. Walker's application for a commission in the Union Army was rejected. Women were not able to serve as full permanent members of all branches of the armed services until 1948. So she served in the Army as a volunteer civilian, although, according to stories, her status as a volunteer did not mean that she shied away from giving orders or for caring and advocating for her patients. She spent much of her time fighting for more hygienic practices in field hospitals and actively campaigning against unnecessary amputations. Dr. Walker also traveled behind enemy lines, was captured, and spent time in a Confederate prison camp. After her release from service in 1865, and with her Medal of Honor pinned often to the front of her coat, Dr. Walker was a fierce and outspoken advocate for the social and political rights of women. She was arrested more than once for wearing men's clothing in public and supported herself through her own medical practice. In 1917, amidst a restructuring and redefining of the procedures and requirements for Medal of Honor recognition, Dr. Walker was stripped of her medal, ostensibly because she had served as a civilian volunteer and not an enlisted service member, and because her citation honored an impressive wartime career rather than a specific instance. Thanks to the efforts of her relatives, especially one great niece, Anne Walker, to keep her memory alive, Dr. Walker's official Medal of Honor recognition was fully restored on June 10, 1977. Though she remains, in some ways, a somewhat controversial figure, the bravery, selflessness, and determination that she exhibited throughout her life, both during her time in the service and beyond it, are, I think, rightfully recognized by the Medal of Honor. Though it took years and Dr. Walker died believing the recognition had been stripped from her, its restoration is an important honoring of the fearlessness with which she believed in the dignity of all people, whether soldiers wounded on the battlefield or women fighting for the full recognition of their personhood. The story of Dr. Walker is also an important reminder of another theme that we'll touch on today, that family stories are history. And without honoring and sharing our family stories, we run the very real risk of obscuring important pieces of what shapes who we are as individuals and as communities. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Stephen Thomas. Stephen is a native of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and a graduate of Middle Tennessee State University with an extensive background. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
An interpreter at historic sites throughout Middle Tennessee. Today, Stephen serves as the Director of Operations at the Charles H. Coolidge National Medal of Honor Heritage Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the birthplace of the Medal of Honor. In this role, Stephen works with the Education and Collections departments and developed the American Identity Tour, which is central to accomplishing the center's mission of educating the public on the heroic deeds of normal citizens who received the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor. Yeah, so it's often interesting, when I hear people outside of the center talk about Dr. Mary Walker, because that is a great example of valor, right? And when people visit our center, we often have this, saying that no mother wants their child to be a Medal of Honor recipient. And that's to change the perspective and to change the thought of what that medal represents. It's the conflict between reality versus perception. We perceive this medal as, representing heroic deeds, when the reality is it's sometimes the worst day of these individuals' lives. And it represents a failure on the part of a higher institution, whether that's the military branch or federal government, whatever the case may be, where a normal everyday person had to step into the breach and to take control of the chaos that was going on around them. And oftentimes they had no idea that they were going to receive the Medal of Honor because they received it posthumously. In one of those cases, when looking at December 7th, 1941, the individual I'm going to start talking about is Captain Bennett. He was the captain of the USS West Virginia. Now, he's a normal, everyday American. He was born in Utah in 1887. He attended high school in Salt Lake City. He goes on to receive an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis in 1906, and he graduates, near the top of his class. He serves during World War I as a young officer commanding on the USS North Dakota. He had fallen, in love with ordnance and gunnery at that point in his career. Captain Bennett will assume command of the USS West Virginia in July of 1941. Now, the ship was affectionately known as the Weavy. It was moored with the vessels at Battleship Row on December 7th, and it was among the first ones hit. I mean, the West Virginia was hit really hard almost immediately after the attack begins. You had at least 6 up to 9 torpedoes counted that hit the ship, including 2 bombs. Now, as the attack is occurring, Captain Bennett is on the bridge. He's running. He goes outside to see if he can get a better understanding of what's happening. Within moments of stepping outside, he is struck by shrapnel or splinters from a bomb, and it ripped his belly open. Now, he's still trying to organize the defense even after he's been wounded. He's lying on the deck. He has men around him coming to aid him, and he's giving them orders and telling them to go and prepare their stations. And he refused to leave, even after this terrible wound. Some of the evidence or some of the reports from guys that were working with him said that his entire stomach was laid open as he's laying on the deck. Now, while the attack is happening, the ship is catching fire. They're trying to move him to different places to keep him out of the smoke and keep him away from the fire. They get him up to the bridge and they scoot him around to one side to where the smoke was being blocked. And eventually he orders everyone to abandon the ship and leave him. And it had gotten to the point where they had no choice. And by the time they went back to get him, he had already died. So at that point, they decided that it was best to just leave him and then abandon ship. Now, after the attack is over, they go to collect his body, and it was the fire had gone around his body. None of the flames had touched him. Now, the one-sided attack is kind of an interesting idea for him. He had talked about in his early days of what would happen if the Navy had been attacked and surprised. But I don't think he ever really knew that he would ever find himself in that situation because the United States was working on becoming one of the world's strongest navies. Now, Bennett is going to receive the Medal of Honor from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in his presentation, he's noted as quote, as a commanding officer of the USS West Virginia, after being mortally wounded, he evidenced apparent concern only in fighting and saving his ship, and strongly protested against being carried from the bridge. So yeah, that's pretty heroic. I'm not going to discount the action itself, but we need to understand that he is a normal human being. Oftentimes, when people come in here, the Medal of Honor will give people this hero worship mentality, and I'm afraid that sometimes that can be dangerous, and especially when you look at the next individual that I'm going to talk about, Doris Miller. Now, Doris is born right outside of Waco, Texas, in a little town called Spiegelville. I think I'm saying that right. Sorry if anybody is tuning in from Spiegelville or Waco. He was the son of sharecroppers, the grandson of formerly enslaved people. And throughout much of his youth, his family said that he wanted to join the armed services. And he finally does in September of 1939. Now, at that time, the military is still segregated. And he is, anytime an African American is wanting to join at this point, they're being discriminated against at many different levels, whether that's in the civilian world, in their uniform, or even for, Doris to be on the ship, he could experience some discrimination. But nevertheless, he continues his training. After that, he is assigned to the USS West Virginia. And at this point, he's helping in the kitchen. He's a cook. Now, at the time of the attack, the breakfast had just ended, and he was collecting laundry according to reports when the ship was attacked. And as the sirens are going off, he ran up to the deck of the ship, where he immediately saw Captain Bennett. He was laying there on the deck with his belly open, and he actually ended up dragging him to the first safe place that he could find. And at this time, because of his race, he was not allowed to learn how to shoot any weapons, use any type of weapon of lethal force anyway. But he jumped on an anti-aircraft gun and started turning it towards Japanese planes as they are flying in. So, he is committed to saving the ship at all costs. And I find it interesting. And if you've ever seen Pearl Harbor, the movie, Cuba Gooding Jr. is actually recreating that in that scene. Now, after everything is said and done, there is some recognition that will come to Miller through because of the action. But it did not live up to what he actually had done. And it finally took FDR granting him the Navy Cross to receive any type of recognition. Now, the picture you're seeing there with Doris in his Navy whites, that is him having the Navy Cross pinned on him by Admiral Nimitz. And almost immediately after, the Navy is going to capitalize on the situation. They understand that they are now in a new total war. And so what they do is they send Miller on a speaking tour to bolster African-American enlistment into the services. And he does this for about a year. But the entire time, he just wanted to get to his next ship. And in 1943, he's going to receive a promotion to petty officer. He's the ship's cook, third class. He is assigned to the escort carrier USS Lipscomb Bay, which unfortunately, that following November, at the Battle of Macon Island, a Japanese torpedo is actually going to sink the ship. and Miller is not going to survive. Now, he was awarded the Purple Heart posthumously for this, but he never received any type of recognition for the Medal of Honor, which many believe he deserved. And there's been efforts to bring that to light even today. There's other ways that he's been recognized, but the Medal of Honor itself can really, show what this man did, because he is just a normal citizen. And for the time period, he was considered a second-class citizen at that, even in the military. So when we look at valor and what it consists of, and what heroism is, it's not limited to race, gender, identity, sexual orientation, or even rank. Yeah, it can be shown in many different instances in and out of the military. So I think that having someone like Miller as an example, right along Captain Bennett, is ultimately the type of heroes that we can look up to, and because we are them. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really wonderful to hear some of those stories, and I'm looking forward to asking you some more questions about some of the work that you do and some of the other stories that you like to highlight. Next, I'm really thrilled to introduce David Kilton. David Kilton is the Interpretation and Visitor Services Lead at Pearl Harbor National Memorial. David has worked for the National Park Service for over 14 years. He first dreamed of working for the NPS because of his love of the outdoors, but has since also found joy in fueling his passion for learning, serving others, and sharing history. Most recently, David worked at Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site in Arkansas. David is honored, these are his words that I'm quoting, honored to work for the National Park Service to promote the agency's mission in preserving and sharing the various legacies, stories of transformative individuals, and iconic natural scenes that make up the United States for present and future generations. So, David, thank you so much for being here. Oh, and David, you are muted. That's okay.
Aaron, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be with everyone here, and aloha from Hawaii. I appreciate Stephen's message and sharing those stories. I actually want to continue on sharing some other stories as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Our actual theme is valor, sacrifice, and peace. And several of the things that Stephen brought up, I think, go right in line with that. And so the first two stories I want to share are actually commendations that were received later on in the process. We actually have the names of the Medal of Honor recipients marked in our circle of remembrance here on site, and they are in gold lettering. As you go to the site, we often get visitors that ask about that. But some of those that received the honor didn't receive it immediately. It took time and effort and actually a lot of work from the families to receive those commendations and become recipients. And so the two I'm going to talk about are not Medal of Honor winners, but they're of a Silver Star and a Bronze Star. And the first story I'd like to bring out is of Lucius H. Smith, who was a Navy chaplain on the USS Oklahoma. Now, USS Oklahoma was one of the three ships that was not able to be salvaged and returned into service out of the battleships that were attacked and damaged on December 7th of 1941. The Oklahoma was the second largest loss of life, with over 400 service members, sailors that went down with that ship. So The chaplain received an initial commendation because he was a non-combat service member. He received his initial commendation with that designation, but eventually was able to have his family get him the Silver Star. And what he did on that day was, as the USS Oklahoma was hit by 4 torpedoes that morning and started to roll into the water, there were efforts of the service members on board to escape. And Chaplain Schmidt was there helping people out. And as the ship was about to go far enough down into the water in its roll, he tried to get out. He was struggling to get out of this port that was open there on the side. And he was struggling so much and he couldn't get out. And he realized that he had a choice. He could really just kind of have individuals from either side help him and get him to safety, or he could potentially stay caught there in the port and block up so that nobody else could escape. So what he chose to do was actually he had individuals to push him back into the ship, and he stayed on board and helped in other individuals to escape and get out of the port before it completely submerged, and there was no ability for anyone else to get out. And so he ended up being one of the over 400 that went down and was entombed, drowned in the ship. The second story that I wanted to share was of Joe George, and he was on basically a repair ship called the Vestal, moored right alongside the USS Arizona. And so as the USS Arizona was struck first by torpedoes and began to sink, he jumped into action with other service members on the Vestal and called to quarters. They're doing things to help out. And eventually he saw, as the Arizona was sinking, he was up on a tower there on the Vestal, and he saw individuals trying to escape the burning deck, the fuel that was on fire. And so he threw over a rope to the tower on the USS Arizona, and actually was able to secure a line with that rope that allowed sailors on the Arizona to crawl over the burning flames on the ocean in between the two ships and get over onto the Vestals to safety, and was able to save several sailors that day before the actual fateful bomb hit the Arizona, went down three decks and lit the munitions, and basically was the death knell of the Arizona and sunk the ship. As I mentioned, both of those stories, commendations were received much later. The families worked to get those commendations and actually change Chaplain Schmidt's commendation so that it was, even though he was a non-combat role, into that combat recognition. The story of Joe George was actually recorded in an interview, and eventually that account was used to get his recognition. Now, I wanted to share one last story of recognition, tying more in with Doris Miller's story and the efforts that had to be made to acknowledge that valor, to that sacrifice that was shown, and that is the story of the USS Mason. The USS Mason was a very unique ship in that it was one of the first predominantly African-American crewed ships. And there were two during World War II that had that. The other was the PCU 1264. The USS Mason was an escort destroyer, and those ships were smaller destroyers. Their purpose was to provide defense and support as escorts to convoys, but also to seek and go after, with their speed and maneuverability, after submarines. So the USS Mason, having that designation, having the predominantly African-American crew that had to face a lot of challenges, I would say demonstrated valor and sacrifice quite often to be able to experience. Maybe some of them were recruited and joined because of Doris Miller's efforts, because the ship went into operation, was actually commissioned in March of 1944. But as these sailors were doing their job, convoying back and forth between England and New York was their regular duty, they faced a significant challenge in that they were escorting the New York convoy 119, a bunch of barges that couldn't go very fast at all. Actually, they said they averaged about 5 knots, which is just about 6 miles an hour. Well, as they were en route in September of 1944, they actually hit a severe storm. And some of the ships were able to move a little bit faster, but they had basically 90-mile-an-hour winds, 40-foot waves, and were actually having a 70-degree roll on some of the decks as they were going through this storm. And so the Mason and its crew, its brave crew, escorted some of the ships as they got closer safely from New York to Plymouth, England. They got those in, and then they actually turned around and went right back into the storm to help escort the rest of those barges safely into harbor. And because of the dedication, the sacrifice that was made, they were actually put up for commendation right after that. But unfortunately, because of the makeup of their crew and some of the difficulties that were still being faced with the racism and bias, they would not receive their commendation. And it actually would take years of effort. Actually, there was a book written to help bring this story out. Was kind of fading into history. And it wasn't until during the Clinton administration in February of 1995 that crew members were able to finally receive that, become recipients of the awards that they were put up for years before, back in 1944. And 11 surviving members of the crew were able to be there and receive that recognition at that time. So the efforts that are put into sharing those stories by the families, by those individuals that connect and engage with those stories, really was what allowed that commendation to take place. And sometimes it was logistical issues that would prevent those. Sometimes it was other things, but those efforts are still being made to help recognize and bring forth the valor and the sacrifice and tell the stories of these amazing common individuals that sacrificed and provided for these opportunities that really stand out. As I think of those stories, knowing my grandfather served in World War II in the European theater and was a Purple Heart recipient, just knowing that those average individuals and the sacrifices they made, that we can sometimes even still see the trauma, really helps to bring to point some of the things Stephen brought out of of who these individuals are. Should we hero worship them? Or basically just let their stories live on so that we can recognize, and if we face similar challenges, what we might do.
Thank you so much, David, for sharing those stories and for those thoughts. I think that's such an interesting thing to think about, the place of humility in the midst of this honor and these ordinary citizens that we're highlighting and talking about today. I also want to thank you especially for sharing the story of the USS Mason and direct folks who are watching to the film festival that's part of this programming. There is a film about the USS Mason that is linked in the chat called Proudly We Serve. So please check that out. They're available until December 7th. So David, as you spoke about how it can take time and the reasons why it can take time to bring about these kinds of recognitions, I was reminded also of other stories about this kind of delayed recognition, namely about the 100th Battalion and the 442 Regimental Combat Team, whose histories are in many ways closely tied to the attack on Pearl Harbor. For those who are joining and are maybe unfamiliar, the 100th and the 442 were the segregated all Japanese American units that served during World War II. And today, these units are recognized as the most decorated of their size and length of service. But during World War II, despite the sort of countless stories about acts of heroism and bravery on the part of these Japanese American soldiers, many of whom had families back in the United States who were imprisoned in incarceration camps, and despite the fact that many Japanese American soldiers were actually recommended for the Medal of Honor at the time, all saw their honors downgraded to Distinguished Service Crosses or Silver Stars, except for one, Sadao Munamori, who was posthumously, awarded the Medal of Honor in 1946. So Japanese Americans, of all of those who served and were awarded Purple Hearts and other recognitions, only one received the Medal of Honor. During World War II, no African Americans were awarded the Medal of Honor, received the Medal of Honor. And as David mentioned, this was something that was reviewed by Congress in the mid-90s. And after a number of African Americans were upgraded, their honors were upgraded to receive the Medal of Honor, Japanese American community members advocated for the same type of review for men in the 442nd and the 100th. And ultimately, the review recommended the upgrade of the honors of 22 Asian American and Pacific Islander soldiers who had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross or the Navy Cross during World War II. And in 2000, President Clinton presented 20 Japanese American soldiers from the 100th and the 442nd with the Medal of Honor. As a side note, also to point you again to the film festival, if you're interested in hearing more of the stories about the 100th and the 442nd, there's another film called Honor and Sacrifice that tells the story of Roy Matsumoto, who's also a veteran. So as we turn to our final speaker of the evening, Randy Dotson, I'm thinking about the meaning behind the recognition that these 20 men received half a century later. As the stories David shared so beautifully illustrated, it can take time to bring about this kind of recognition, but that by no means diminishes the significance. So with that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce Randy, who's going to share with us a personal family story about advocating for recognition of his uncle's valorous service during World War II. Hi, Randy.
Hello.
Just to introduce you a little bit, Randy Dotson was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. After graduating from Northeast High School, Randy served 12 years on active duty with the United States Marine Corps before earning his associate's degree from National University in San Diego and working in California and Arkansas. Currently, Randy is an interpretive park ranger at Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site, where he's worked for 5 years. Randy, thank you so much for being here and for sharing some of your family's story with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was honored when David asked me to be a part of this. I was really, really thrilled because I think the stories of African Americans that didn't get their just rewards need to be told. And one in particular is my great uncle. His name is John Henry Anderson. He served in World War II. He was at the Battle of the Bulge, and he was burned over 70% of his body. He was part of the gasoline supply company that was part of General Patton's outfit. They were struck by enemy. I guess their job was to supply gasoline to all the vehicles and tanks or whatever that need to be done. and he was his position was hit, and he was burned severely. If you could put the picture up of him right now, Joy. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's my uncle, my great uncle. He's 98 years old, soon be turning 99. He he was a sharecropper, and he joined the army because he wanted to serve his country. He fought. He did everything they were supposed to do, and the stories that we get from him, um, being being members of the family, listening to his stories and accounts of what happened, and it was really quite sad what how they treated the African American soldiers. He said they would often send them into places where they didn't want to send the white soldiers, and they would go in and they would do their job, and they did the best job that they could do. And then to listen to the stories of how this man was treated when he came back home. Um, they couldn't walk around in their uniforms. People wouldn't respect them. They talked bad to him, and I decided to try to get him his Purple Heart because that's the only thing he really wanted is to get that Purple Heart. So I started trying to do everything I could to research, to go into send letters to to anybody I could to try to help him get this Purple Heart. I contacted the me being a military man, I was in the Marines, but I contacted St. Louis. That's where all the records were kept, and they said that there was a big fire, and unfortunately, the storage area where his records were kept were lost. It was a total loss, and they had no records of him, his accounts of what happened. And so then they went on to say, well, we're going to need, in order for him to get this award, we're going to need someone to verify that this happened. This man is 98 years old. They wanted someone that was a part of his unit to be to verify the story. But he's 100% disabled veteran. He was burned over 70% of his body, and yet he gets no award. And that's really sad to me because I know the struggle that he went through, being an African American, being in the military. At that time, it was horrible, and a lot of the things that they went through, it it just baffles me today. But I understand that. But those were the times, and that's where they were doing African Americans. Um, I mean, it's really not much more to say. I've tried everything. We as a family, we've tried to write senators, congressmen. We've done everything, and still he can't get his medal. And I'd hate for him to be awarded this medal posthumously, after he's passed on, and he's 98 years old. How much longer, really, um, can this fight continues before it's over? But it's David. We put on a program a few years back to try to let him come and talk about his experiences at Little Rock Central High School, and it was awesome. It was awesome listening to him and listening to their stories. But just like the Miller, I mean Doris Miller, that's how they did Black people, and that's how they did African Americans. And it's sad, but that was the way that it was. But we're still fighting. We're still gonna try to find him, get that medal for him because I know he truly, truly deserved it. And I don't know. That's about all I have with it right now. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Randy. And I think it's really powerful to hear your story and the work that your family is doing to recognize your great uncle, especially having heard some other stories of folks who also fought to have their family members or folks in their communities recognized. So please keep us posted. And if there's things that we can do as individuals to support or to hear these stories, please feel free to share.
Yeah, there was the new they did a news special on him and everything here, a local news station, and so we're trying to get help, and well, we're still fighting it. It's not over with yet, so we're going to continue to fight.
Right. That's great.
Mhm.
And actually, this is kind of a nice segue into bringing Stephen and David back on screen too. We were talking before we got started about this idea of valor. And Stephen, you kind of jokingly said it's really hard to define what valor is, and I warned you all that I was going to ask you what it means to you. And so I think, Randy, we'll come to you last. I'll start with you, Stephen. Maybe could each of you tell us, both from the stories that you shared with us tonight and from the work that you do every day, what does valor mean to you? And what do you think are the lessons or the values of sharing these stories with, young folks and visitors to all of the sites that you all work at today? So Stephen, we'll start with you, and then I'll pass it off to you, David, and Randy, you'll take us home.
I often look at valor and some of these actions and stories, and as a human, I want to understand it the best I can. So one of the ways is, kind of a 3-step process. You have a passion for something and you love it so much that you act. I mean, love is an action. And what is the noble intent, right? Oftentimes people will love something and act on it, but if it's not benefiting anything, then, is that valor? And, I often think to teachers, they have a love for education. They act on it by teaching, and the noble intent is to share, and educate, our students. And when I have kids come in here, I try to get them to think of these people as their teachers and not as these, as heroes, right? Because then they can actually understand something from our exhibits. Valor is, ultimately, I honestly think that you can't define it. I really don't think it when you see it, but you can't put words to it.
Stephen, I appreciate you saying that as I try to put words to it. I really, as I think about that, I think about the 2 stories that I've told most recently within my position, and that's the story there at Little Rock Central High School and this story. And the trauma that was faced in both incidents is so real. And the courage and bravery that was shown in the face of that trauma in so many different ways really defines something to look for and give that respect and honor to. And as I even saw Randy being one of my staff that worked with me that shared that story every day, and it brought some of the same trauma that he experienced through his life as he had to desegregate his own school as a young boy. And then as my staff here at Pearl Harbor go and share the atrocities and the reality of war, the pain that it brings up in the visitors that hear those stories as they, visualize what happened in both instances, and also the pain that it brings up within those employees themselves. It's so real. And I think really trying to find what is a worthwhile sacrifice is what I would consider being valor, and putting that effort into making that sacrifice and doing what is right in those situations. It may not always be someone that you would look up to in the other attributes of their life, but they rose to the moment to really show what was worth fighting for and making a difference in.
Yeah, well, I wish you would have came to me second, because David just stole my work. he just stole my thing. But yeah, no. But when I think about valor, the first word to come to my mind is sacrifice. Sacrifice, dedication. People that has who display valor. They sacrifice themselves. They're not thinking of only themselves. They're thinking about the greater cause. I've known Marines that have thrown their bodies on. I had a Sergeant Major Kellogg, when I was stationed in Hawaii. He was a Medal of Honor winner. He thrown himself on a grenade saving people, and that was he put himself aside. He didn't worry about himself. He sacrificed. He was willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice to save his fellow Marines. And that, to me, is valor. I mean, it's something that I don't think it can be taught. It's just in you. When you see something and you know what needs to be done, you don't second guess it. You just do it. And so that's the word that comes to my mind, is sacrifice. And for those that do sacrifice their own well-being for others, I think they need to be at least accommodated. I mean, it's just a medal, but it's not just a medal. It's what it stands for, what it represents, because you don't get any extra money because you get it or nothing like that. It's just to say that, you know what, I did what I needed to do for my country. And so, and as a Marine and being, put in harm's way or being away from your family, not knowing if you're going to come back, but doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it for, like you said, the core of God and your country. That's what we do these things for. So that's my take on valor.
Hmm. Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. It's powerful to hear, and I think gives us a lot to think about. Relatedly, a little bit different, I think. As I've listened and reflected on what all three of you shared today, I was struck by this idea that the stories we hear of folks who were awarded, who earned a Medal of Honor, are so inspirational. But we also heard stories about how the Medal of Honor and others of these recognitions were not immune to the forces of racism and inequity throughout history. And that's something that, Randy, I think your story so powerfully sums up, we're still reckoning with and grappling with. And so I'm wondering, thinking also about the theme of these events and thinking about peace and justice, how do we tell stories about, Medal of Honor recipients or others who've sacrificed so much, who've given of themselves without a second thought to serve their country, to serve the people they're with, whatever it may be? How do we tell those stories in a way that maybe helps us see a path towards a more just future, or a future filled with more peace? Especially as we're also acknowledging at the same time the ways that racism has affected the way that we tell these stories and who's been awarded these medals. That's another big question, and I will let whoever wants to start there.
Well, if I could start this one.
Go ahead, Randy.
That's a good question. And the answer to your question from my perspective is to just tell that story. You just tell it. I mean, you don't dress it up, you don't sugarcoat it, you just tell it. If it happened, it happened. Just like what we tell at Little Rock, it happened. And I will not sugarcoat it. It happened and I'm gonna tell it. I went to a seminar and it was like, how do you tell these, difficult stories? You just tell them. And so that's the best way I can put it. I mean, it is what it is, and I think the future generations, they need to know what happened. They need to know so that they won't repeat it. And that's my take on it.
David, I know you had some thoughts too.
Sure, no, and I'm actually going to build on what Randy said, hopefully, because I think he said it very well, and I think there might be some that say bringing in some of those other stories takes away from respecting and showing honor to those that did receive the recognition, or those that are entombed here on the memorial, and that we provide that space for people to go and connect with and show their respects. And I feel it adds to it. Personally, I feel that the more you share the other stories, the other sacrifices, the other efforts that went alongside those that gave that ultimate price, whether it was December 7th, 1941, or in the years to come, or suffered through that trauma and pain, and died from the aftermath of those, effects later in life. Those additional stories and those other pieces that we have to just tell, like Randy brought out, add to the context of what those sacrifices really were for, and what they meant, and how so many others were impacted by those that lost their lives in a minute, or those that continued on and struggled with the trauma for years to come. And I feel, as we strive to better understand what those stories are and share those stories, it helps us today to really reflect on how we can be better, how we can serve, how we can honor those that did make those sacrifices and did step up to the moment. And that's all I think we can do, and just check ourselves in those moments as we hear those stories and reflect on the bigger picture.
Yeah, and if I may, language is one of the most powerful ways to be able to tell that story, right? And the words that we choose, we give these individuals their story, their power. They had their autonomy over their lives, even if they didn't have it at the time. Doing work with African American history, learning the difference between what slave and enslaved means, like it's the same type of mentality when it comes to talking about recipients. There's a reason I call them recipients, not winners, or, it's this certain language that you got to use that, even extends to Purple Heart recipients. They received it because they did this, not they won it. It's not, it's not a competition to win. So when you receive something, that is a recognition. And unfortunately, as we're talking, not everyone received that recognition. And so to tell those stories, you got to use the proper language to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as a historian, that's the words that we use. And I think we see that around us today in so many ways. The words that we use have an incredible amount of power, and the stories that we tell, and the more stories that we tell, I think is the way forward. And we're looking towards justice and towards peace. So thank you. I could ask a million more questions, but there are questions from the audience. So I want to turn to those now. Hanako Akatsuki asks, and maybe Stephen, I'll direct this to you. Did Doris Miller receive any other recognition for his actions?
Yes, he did. But it wasn't until last year. So his hometown in Waco, they did small things. They erected a statue of him. But at the national level, he actually, the Navy commissioned a carrier to be named after Miller, which is really, really cool to think about, because all the other carriers are named after presidents. So 10 carriers named after U.S. presidents, and then the 11th one, Doris Miller. I love it.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
That is great. And our other audience question from Kelsey Larson: what is the consideration process for these recognitions happening so many years later? Joe George's oral history being a deciding factor was mentioned. So I don't know, Stephen or David or Randy, if you want to take a stab at this.
So we actually have a couple of potential recipients that we are working to get recognition for, both from the Civil War and from Vietnam. And the consideration process, it starts at the grassroots of families sharing stories, units sharing stories, and then it's up to the individuals, the citizens, to take it to a representative to be the champion for it. And from there, it just continues to go up the chain until it gets to to DC, and then it's a waiting game. We've been waiting for about 2 years on one of the Civil War recipients, and so it's the consideration of it is really up to the individual. You consider that valor, and then you start pushing it. And at any point, someone can say, it doesn't meet the criteria. And then you got to start all the way over again. And that is a long and tedious process that it's worth it in the end. And I hope that one day I'm alive to hear Doris Miller's name called on the Medal of Honor roll.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, we have somehow made it to the end of our time here, but I want to ask each of you one last question before we wrap up, because this is the first live program of this week of events, and reflecting on what we've talked about today, but then I think also on this anniversary that's upcoming around Pearl Harbor and the work that each of you does in your lives outside of this program. I wonder if you could each share one sort of takeaway or final thought that you'd like to leave folks who are watching and folks who will watch this in the future with, that's maybe reflecting on this program or reflecting on this idea of storytelling and recognition and valor and how those three things interact. So Stephen, I know you just spoke, but we'll go in speaking order. So Stephen, we'll start with you and then actually mix it up. We'll go to Randy second and then David last.
Yeah, it's really difficult to be in this center with all of these exhibits and not meditate on all of them. I oftentimes find myself teary-eyed staring up at our exhibit of Dr. Walker and thinking of the discrimination that she faced. But some of the things that I take away is just being a decent human being, taking care of others around you. When I read look at the character values that are associated with the Medal of Honor. You have patriotism. Is it taking a knee during the national anthem? Is it waving an American flag? I think it's yes to both. So there's a lot of different ways that you can show valor in our everyday lives, right? And it could be as small or as big. But one thing that I reflect on all the time is I can do better. I can be better.
Thank you, Stephen. Randy.
Yeah, just one thing I can leave with everyone would just be to show gratitude and for those people that have served in this country in the military. This past Veterans Day was it's always emotional for me because of knowing what not just my people, but like you said, the Japanese, everybody that served in this country, in the military, deserves to be respected. Me and my wife, we were out for dinner, and I saw this two couples sitting at a table. Old, I mean, these guys looked like they had been in World War II, had their little hats on. They were so proud of their service, and so I always go up to them and thank them. Hey, I don't know them personally, but I personally thank both of them for the sacrifices. I don't know what they didn't matter, but for the simple fact that they served and they put their lives on the line. And there are so many that will never be known. There were so many heroes we'll never know, but just to know that they served was good enough, So I just think that we need to honor those people that served in the military because they really gave up a lot. And I know for myself, being away from my family, from with little babies at home, and I had to be away from them for un, you know unknown amounts of time, 40 days, 30 days, 60 days. That's rough. That's pretty hard, So I just think that we all need to be just thankful and just be appreciative of the sacrifices made.
Thank you, Randy. David.
Well, I want to thank everybody for the discussion, for the opportunities we've had today, and for helping to make our commemoration of the 80th possible. I have really just gained a lot from this experience, and that's something that I guess I would have as my closing statement is I think we can gain a lot from coming together and not putting the barriers that seem to be a consistent thing, is that we look to push away more often than coming together. And as we come together, as we share stories, as we learn from each other, sometimes we're going to reveal pain. Sometimes we're going to reveal heartache and hard moments. And we may not always agree, but we can gain from coming together in all instances. And we get visitors to national parks all the time that come and are so excited to be in those locations. And this is definitely one of those places where people kind of go, oh, I want to go there. And being able to connect with those individuals and often hear them share their reflections and their stories about what is special about that moment. There's value in that. And the more we see that, the more we gain from that, the better we're going to be as individuals and as a joint community. And so I just encourage everybody to share your stories, come and see us, and we'll grow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, the three of you, for your time and for sharing these stories and reflecting. You've given me a lot to think about, and I think folks watching at home a lot to think about as well. Thank you so much to those of you who joined us and left questions and comments. A huge thank you to Joy Yamaguchi and Hanako Akatsuki backstage for running everything so smoothly. There will be another program on Wednesday at the same time, same YouTube channel. So please come back with your questions and comments and thoughts. And thank you so much again, Randy, David, and Stephen, for being here with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Thank you,
having me.
Aaron.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.